Well, hello again. Welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor, Joe Sparrow. And this episode is another in our series of podcasts investigating ethics and responsibility in the music industry. We'll be chatting with the artist LoveSsega on how he combines his music career with climate justice and how he sees a big business opportunity for artists who are confident enough to broach climate issues, and also on whether artists have a responsibility not to be silent on this climate issue. Now, what's this Focus podcast? Well, Music Ally provides, as you know, an analysis-rich, contextual guide to the music business. And each of these Focus episodes analyzes one meaningful music business story at a time. And the podcast is going to be quick as well. It should take about the same amount of time that Zach the Parrot could hypothetically open 700 canned drinks. Zach, who's technically a macaw, opened 35 cans in 1 minute in 2012. Now, talking of releasing gases into the atmosphere, the climate emergency is the most meaningful challenge of our time, and one that the music industry can make a number of changes in relation to, whether that's in terms of reducing music business carbon footprints or individual artists using their influence to encourage fans to make a difference. London-based artist LoveSsega has combined making music with climate justice, so he joined us to talk about his work addressing the climate emergency from the perspective of an artist, but also about the business opportunity that awaits artists if they adopt and become vocally supportive of climate-friendly activities. So let's hop over to the interview now. Okay, so we're very happy to be joined by LoveSsega. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me here. It's great to be on the podcast and, talk about such an issue and my music and art.
First of all, can you set a little bit of context for our listeners here? Can you sort of tell us briefly about yourself as an artist, but how that fits in with your work around climate justice and activism in a sort of more general sense?
Yeah, so as a musician and an artist and a songwriter, I guess I first started off at university. We started a little band called Clean Bandit, where I was the songwriter and the frontman at that time. Then I left to do some more studying. Then they got signed, and then the label nicely released some of the songs which I'd written. So I went and toured and did everything with that. And obviously they went on to have loads of number ones and Grammys and stuff. And then I had my own solo career as an independent artist and have released EPs. And I guess in that sense, I was a traditional, solo artist, just performing and doing all of that stuff. Then when COVID came, that's when all the touring stopped. Everything stopped. And then I was stuck in Lewisham in my local area. And it's at that stage I had been engaged in some sort of activities which were socially minded activities and environmentally minded activities. But that was a real chance to actually dig in and to try and investigate that more. And it came from an opportunity with Julie's Bicycle, who I believe you've had on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm written about a lot, as well, yeah. And so what was it? I mean, obviously it was something that you were interested in and felt passionate about anyway, but it was really that pause in the day-to-day activity of touring and being an artist that gave you a chance to go, okay, I want to focus on this.
Exactly. So, and I think for lots of people who are listening in, whether you've got artists on your label or whether you manage them, I think it was very difficult for the whole industry, especially the live industry, when lockdown came and everything stopped. And even now, it's with the cost of living and everything else, things haven't picked up again. So as an artist, we all, and creative people, even all my friends and people I work with, we're thinking, okay, what do we do now? What's your point? Are people going to listen to what you're saying? Especially people got their own concerns. So for me, it was just like, it was looking inwards and saying, okay, why am I doing music for? Should I just pack it all in and get another job where I can get paid? Or do I have a platform and do I have something creative where I can reach out to people and will people actually listen to that? So I was looking inwards and I just thought, the reason why I think all of us get involved in music is because musicians resonate with us and they talk about certain things which maybe we don't have, which maybe people who aren't involved in creative industry don't have time to express themselves. So when you start to then see of our time, it's not the Vietnam War, it's not so much the Cold War, it's not all of these other different things which were going on. We've got this new set of challenges, and I think the climate emergency comes on top of that. And especially if we look back we had Me Too, Black Lives Matter, especially, then I'm really interested as a, Black individual of how climate then intersects with race and social injustice. And when I look at the landscape, and if there's nothing of this time to speak to that, then as an artist, there's a hole where I can at least try and jump in to that space.
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point, isn't it? Which artists traditionally have had this. I was going to say secondary role, but it's inherent in the big picture, which is they make music that we care about and that moves us. But also, not all artists, but some artists have an opportunity then to open a conversation up about something, and and that's where the sort of line between artistry and politics becomes blurred, because you get people talking and interested in or open their minds to something which perhaps they couldn't articulate or didn't fully connect with before. Now, it kind of seems silly that to have to sort of clearly state this, but the climate emergency is the single most pressing issue of our time.
Yeah.
It's the priority one, right? I mean, There's a lot of noise at the moment in the world. There's so many different issues that are really important and need fixing, and it almost seems controversial to set a priority here, but it is, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the biggest issue of our time, and it affects everyone. And I think you've just got to look backwards and think, when injustices had happened, true, you might not have had the power to change things at the time, or it might have seemed very difficult. Like if you look at apartheid and you look at that whole period of time, it might have seemed very difficult in late 70s, early 80s. But then something was done. People came together, and especially, and then you think, okay, what was the music around movement? So the song "Free Nelson Mandela." When you think about this, music and culture has always tracked the revolution. So in this time, it's like, especially if the climate emergency isn't getting as many headlines in the newspapers, in the traditional media, then we've got to look at the culture and say, okay, well, what are we doing to help lift it up there? Because otherwise we'll look like the band that was playing on the Titanic when the ship was going down. And it's like, do you just want to be doing that? Or would you rather say, okay, no, hold on, let's do something about it. Let's make some noise. Well, literally.
I just caught myself saying something then, which was, not every artist necessarily has a political message, but actually by not communicating something, you were also making a political statement, I guess, in that sense. So I'm not asking you I'm not trying to stir up trouble, or I'm not trying to get you to
condemn, I'm here for the trouble.
Art. Okay, good. Well, in that case then, do you think that artists have a responsibility not to be silent on an issue this important? There are some big name artists out there who aren't really saying much.
Yeah, I think the whole beauty of art and culture is you can have different types of music for different situations. So in the same way, you can have your bubblegum pop, and then you can have your NWA, or you can have your Public Enemy, or you can have all of that on that side. So, but then the difficulty that we have now is you've just got to look at it. So if I was head of a major label right now, I'd just look at my roster and I would say, okay, out my roster, how many people are keeping quiet about it, and how many people are actually talking about these issues of the time right now? And if it's 90% keeping quiet, then that's a problem. But then in the same way, we're not saying 90% of the artists have to then be making protest music or political music. But if we just look, or you just look at whether we're on the streaming, Spotify or Apple Music or Tidal, and you just look at the front page, and if it's all just music to make us feel better, because I think there's two strands where we do need music where we can switch off, where, where we can just have a good time. We could just switch off, not think too much, and it can just soothe us because life is stressful. But then we also need some things to challenge us. So just look at the balance. Just go on any go on any media, music press, and then see, is it all just, okay, let's keep the people dancing? Then I think as a generation of execs, as a generation of musicians, then we're letting people down, because you've got to think and say, okay, look, at this time, if other people are making great music, which was talking to, whether it's like a Joni Mitchell, whether it's a Tracy Chapman, whether it's Marvin Gaye, his biggest album, what's going on, he was talking to these issues. So is our time memorable? And it's interesting, just because I think, like I've spoken to, the music industry is great because when there's a system to push something forward, and when it gets it, it can push something straight forward and it can push it everywhere, especially from the UK. We've had humongous artists. You know, we've got Adele, we've got Ed Sheeran. And so you can see where you can take people from Tottenham or Ipswich or wherever Ed Sheeran's from, and you can really push it really fast. So it's like, why can't we do that with someone who's talking about these issues from the point of view of what people are saying now? Greta Thunberg, the most popular young person now is Greta Thunberg. You know, so you got to think about that. She's not a musician, but imagine if there was a musician having Greta Thunberg's comments and sensibilities and way of thinking, then surely that's gonna work. If you want to make money, that will work because that's what people are listening to.
Yeah, that sounds like it makes sense, doesn't it? And what the music industry is good at is pushing against an open door if there's money behind the open door, you know. So
Exactly.
Let's just take the two names you mentioned there, Adele and Ed Sheeran. We know, and this isn't their fault, as major artists that tour, they have a large carbon footprint. And I'm not trying to condemn them for that. It's just a fact of life. They have, you know, Ed Sheeran takes 15 trucks on tour with him, and that's how it happens. And then 60,000 people travel to the stadium, and that generates a carbon footprint. So there's all this stuff which is real, and we can talk about it because it's real. I don't read the Ed Sheeran press enough to state this authoritatively, but could he be saying, or someone like that in his position, be saying a lot more and becoming the Greta Thunberg of that position, of leveraging this huge fan base and their authority and saying, hey, I'm not going to be preachy to you, but let's talk about this.
Well, I think I have a sneaky feeling that is actually going to happen. I think that might happen soon, and I think you will find it might be people like Ed Sheeran, and that's the thing where, again, as that's what I'll say to everybody else who's not Ed Sheeran, is culturally, do you want to be at the vanguard or do you just want to be, you know, following on the coattails, you know? So it's a sort of thing where, you know, these people, Adele and Ed Sheeran, they're just artists. But like you said, it's touring. You know, there's a whole infrastructure of whether it's the touring at festivals. There's one thing to say, all right, an artist X, Stormzy or whoever, they should make sure that the festival is green energy or whatever it is. Or there's a difference between the people who are putting on these Live Nations and Festival Republics, them saying, okay, well, actually, we're going to move to the green energy thing. And in fact, I think at Reading and Leeds, they had the hashtag No Music on a Dead Planet. They included that to get your face shown on the screen. And that was with Music Declares Emergency, which is a great organization. And
we've also had on the podcast.
Exactly.
So I will link to that.
Exactly. So big them up. But then you can see where if the infrastructure, where they're making that change, the festivals on that side, then it makes it easier. So then if venues then say, well, do you know what? Even from the live sense, let's be imaginative about this. Because do we really need, let's say, 15 trucks? Do you really, really need to say these amps and all of these things, which I'm pretty sure are available in different cities? It is not beyond the wit of humankind to then say, look, we can travel lighter. We can change the set list. We don't need to be taking stuff in the 70s. Maybe they didn't have it everywhere and you had the 1 amp, whereas now it's everywhere. So now we can be smart about this. And then if we make those decisions easier to then say, okay, it's not just down on the artist, but across the industry, you've made it better. Then all the fun things you can do. I was in some conversations where you can make it fun to say, oh, we're going to do a gig here in Manchester or just outside Manchester. And as a band, we're going to put on buses from the train station. And then on the buses, you can have, I know, some exclusive songs and stuff like that on the buses. So everyone comes together and it's like going to a football match, a cup final, something like that. You can do these innovative things, which then have a positive impact. And then that makes you think, whereas we've been a bit lazy. And as we can see, through the laziness, it was cheap to be lazy. Whereas now with the cost of living thing, we can't be lazy. If we're just lazy, we'll be on the wrong energy tariff and then we can't afford to even heat our homes before we even make a song or go to work or do anything like that. So
thinking, like you just said, thinking beyond that, I would like to get on a bus to go to my favorite artist shows. You know, that sounds like great fun, you know, but I mean, it's not a huge leap, is it? I mean, it happens, but it's almost like, again, the ideas are there, the examples are there, the case studies are there. It's not, and the infrastructure is kind of already there. It's just not being pulled together. And there's something else you sort of mentioned there, which is perhaps answers my question really, which is, you know, these big artists, they don't need to be like Sting in the 80s, publicly making declarations about rainforests, they can just behind the scenes say, okay, I'm only going to play shows where the energy is green energy. And all of a sudden, they can use their power to make people fall in line, right? But what about then that communication part then? Because this is what artists do really well. And of course, when you're Adele, you have a lot more power to shift around and to say, well, I'm not, to say that I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this. But also they do have a highly motivated fan base. I always think that Taylor Swift is probably only about like 3 social media posts away from from causing a revolution, because if she told all her fans to go and do something, they'd just go and do it. There's that top-down approach, isn't there, by Coldplay setting an example and artists making these deals behind the scenes. But also, if you start from the bottom of the pyramid and say to your fans, hey, I really like venues with green tariffs and merch with cotton that's come from sustainable sources, and I want you to push for that as well. Could they actually, do you think, motivate fans to come the other way? Or is there a bit of a risk there?
No, I think that's a great example. And I think that's the way I kind of look at myself and my career in a way. Because on one side of the scale, so I'm involved in, so out of all of this, I'm involved in Earth Percent, which is a charity which is trying to get the music industry as a whole, and like the major music industry, to then say, to put money behind climate action in different ways.
And that's putting a sort of like a small percentage of your income, devoting it to that, right? Yeah,
exactly. So, and that's across the board. So whether it's like legal actions, the sort of work that Client Earth do, who Coldplay incidentally also support, or whether it's activist groups across the world, or whether it's the touring side of it. So all different facets and access. So on that thing, that was it was co-founded by Brian Eno. So you got Brian Eno on the one hand, and then you still got me on a different scale. But then that's the whole beauty of music, art, and culture. You have different people. So with me, the way I look at it is, like you say with Taylor Swift, one full misstep and everything could go like up. As in, these people have social media followings larger than most countries in the world. So they probably speak to more people than leaders of elected officials actually have contact with. But for myself, I'm in a position where I don't have these risks. I don't have these burdens, because again, that's the sort of career which I have kind of chosen. So it's like I can take more risks. And in a way, I want to show artistically it's possible. So if I can do this within my means, if I can do this within my parameters of what I know, then I can show, look, this is possible. And if you don't evolve, you're going to die. So in terms of, let's say, venues, I think a lot of grassroots venues, maybe they're struggling to stay afloat. And then some bigger venues, again, I'm not sure how much exciting program we get from the venues, and programming in the sense of saying, okay, look, here are core mission statements to have greener energy or reduce the amount of beef or that sort of stuff. So instead of me just saying, I am an artist, I only perform in venues, I'm saying, well, let me go to spaces where I can bring an audience, my audience. And that's how I end up in galleries, because they're like, okay, let's use your art and creativity to tackle some of these heavy topics of the time, and you can use our space and to bring people in to have those conversations. And what I've found, whether it's galleries, whether it was the National Gallery first, and then now it's going on to South Bank Centre, working Royal Festival Hall, they're working with Philharmonia Orchestra. What I'm finding is, guess what? The audience wants something different. They want this. The different venues, they want to show that, look, we're relevant, because we're tackling the biggest thing of the time. So, and I've had less pushback in the arts world and the culture world than in the music world. So then there's music, if you're looking at with arts, then you've got to think, okay, music, are we getting lazy and boring and predictable? So that's what you've got to think. And then it's like, okay, if I'm head of a label, again, are your artists getting opportunities to express themselves? And are we supporting them? Or are we going to say, oh no, don't do that because that's not attached to this and you won't get on this streaming playlist? Well, the thing is, the climate emergency lives outside the framework of streaming. Artists live outside the framework of streaming. Streaming is brilliant and it's great. But there are other aspects. So to see real individuals who are then going to support you, who are then going to engage, who are then going to put push culture, music forward. We need to engage those. But if we can't engage those because we're trying to focus on our old way of touring, they all might be on a Just Stop Oil march or something. So they're not coming to our gigs because we're not talking about the important stuff. So we'll lose the people there.
This is a huge opportunity then, isn't it? Because, if
Massive.
If what you're talking about here is essentially a great business opportunity that also solves these other problems at the same time.
Massive, massive, massive. Because again, you look at it, like who would have thought that green energy would be cheaper than oil and gas, and it is, and it is a massive thing for Britain, to then say, okay, look, if we can show the way culturally in the same way where historically, where you can go back to the Beatles, you can go back to so many different things. We've always like led the way in certain aspects of popular culture. And then now if we're kind of missing a step, because if you look at what's happening in Korea and how they, with K-pop and their K-dramas and their film and how they're doing that, then okay, well, maybe we don't need to put in the millions and billions that they have put in. But if from just an ideological point of view, we can do this stuff. If we trumpet Glastonbury, which started off with Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, if we look at that festival and that's our biggest shining light, which has become a big, massive touring thing, then we can do that across the board with all of these other green issues. Because I mean, let's face it, who could have thought 10 years ago in whatever city you would have vegan restaurants? So I'm not saying whether you should be a vegan or not be a vegan, but clearly there's a business being a vegan. So you look at all of these things, 0 alcohol beer. I definitely think in the music industry, people would not have seen that one coming. But clearly these big Heinekens and all of these other big companies are saying, let's make this, because this is what people are doing. So you've got to look, and it's a massive, massive opportunity. And it's exciting as well.
Okay, and just to jump in here, if you're finding this useful and you'd like more of this in-depth news and trusted analysis waiting for you in your inbox every morning, as well as access to all of our industry-leading reports, head on over to musically.com/subscribe. And you, yes, you may be eligible for a free Music Ally subscription via our corporate and sponsored subscriptions. So if you work for a DSP, a major label, an indie label, or if you're an artist manager, an employee of a CMO or a publisher, you can check to see if it's available for you. It's musically.com/subscription-options. There's a link below the podcast to check out as well. Okay, let's go back to the interview. Again, this is a no-brainer, and it seems weird to point this out, but this is what people want. People don't want the destruction of the planet. People do want things to work in a way that does not add to the destruction of the planet. And as long as it's not significantly more inconvenient or significantly more expensive, they are happy to do these new things which make a difference. Vegan restaurants are the same price as restaurants where you eat meat, but meat is significantly more expensive. That even when produced at volume, right? So it's sort of, people don't mind that. There's this sort of weird disconnect between what people want and what's actually happening. Do you feel then that we're actually pretty close to there being a significant change here? Like going bankrupt, it happens very slowly, then happens very suddenly.
Yeah. I think that's the case. And I think the uplifting thing is in a way, maybe some people might think, I'm thinking maybe some people within the industry aren't supporting their artists to say what they want to say, or to make the change, or to put this in their songs, or to perform these venues, or change their riders and stuff. Whereas the big elephant in the room is the right wing media that we have in this country, and that is what scares a lot of people in this country. But then what I would say is when we look past those headlines. So, for instance, if we're going to talk about Adele and Ed Sheeran, like Adele spoke up so much for the Grenfell families, and she's been doing that, but you don't see that front and center. So, but when you hear about, when you look at Grenfell and the issues there in terms of planning, and then the quality of people's homes and everything like that, that is also linked to the climate emergency, because if people are in substandard living conditions, they are going to be affected the most. So when we had the 40-degree heat here in the UK, people who are in these poor things, apart from them being a death trap, they don't have any comfort of to even withstand the emergency that's happening right now And so an artist like Adele was speaking up for those individuals because they were near where she grew up, but then it's not covered in the media. Now, the good thing about the climate emergency is the fact that it's a global thing. So yes, maybe if we won't get the headlines in the UK media, but on a global scale, it will resonate more with more people, with more audiences. If you're going to look to Latin America, if you look to Africa, if you look to Afro beats and you look at all of the different genres which are then coming up and where do the people live, they're experiencing, whether it's drought, whether it's floods like in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, and in all these different places, they're experiencing these different things. If we love reggae has been, and West Indian music has been so strong, we look at island records in the UK and stuff, but then these islands could go underwater. You know, so again, these different issues, you're going to find Rihanna talk about these issues. You're going to find all these other people come forward to talk about this. So just because in the past, and I can understand where you look globally, you look locally and you're like scared, okay, we don't want to annoy this person, otherwise you're in the right-wing media here. The rest of the world doesn't have the right-wing media. So you would find more common ground on an issue like this. These music companies, streaming takes your music globally. That's the thing. So again, we need to be talking the language of what the rest of the globe is talking about as well. And that's the amazing opportunity to have some solidarity. Then we get rid of all of these xenophobia, bigotry, and all of these other things to talk about how we can survive.
So let's look forward then. You know, we're at this point where, like you mentioned, it feels like there's possibly on the verge of a tipping point where parts of the music industry and people in it are going to just sort of click over to this new way of doing things, and then we'll look back and go, oh, we've done it, you know. But what will that look like do you think in the future? If you look forward, you've mentioned all these alternative ways of touring or performing, which sound really exciting. We've sort of talked about how festivals will have, instead of relying on petrol, diesel generators, they have massive battery packs, and that's an infrastructure thing. You know, this transitional period, how long do you think that might take once it gets started?
I think it might not take that long. For instance, before, like just at home, like where I live, before I was on just British Gas, then I just like a couple years ago said, oh, okay, let me just change the energy company. And then you change to Octopus, who say that all of they try and source their energy from renewables. So that was just a quick switch. So, and then again, like people, any business, any individual, you can change your bank from one that invests in fossil fuels to one that doesn't invest in fossil fuels. So that's a very quick switch. Then I tried to do, for one of my community air pollution and music and arts events, I did something in Southwark Park, and then to look for local suppliers in Southwark in South London, who could provide these solar panels and batteries, generators for a small event, 1,000 cap, and they exist. So all these different things do exist and they are there. So it might not take that long to switch over. And I think people are primed because we're talking about all of these different things. If people had money, then, you know, we had Insulate Britain, you know, we have people saying, oh, if I had money now, I'd put on solar panels so I don't have to pay these mad gas bills, which are still going up and up and up. That's not going away. Like fossil fuels aren't getting cheaper. So just the consumers are going to be ready for that. They're primed, whereas 5 years ago, maybe that wasn't a conversation. Maybe I wasn't even looking at that. So I think there is that opportunity. And then I'd say from the cultural point of view, I think hopefully it will reinvigorate the UK, because I'm from London, grown up in London, love music in London. It's great. I can hear anything. But it's a crying shame that we don't have that diversity of voices. You mentioned Sting. He's from the Northeast. Okay, now we've got Sam Fender, which is great. But then, you know, Arctic Monkeys, again, when growing up, you know, you had them and it was like they were the voice of Sheffield and Yorkshire. So we need to, the climate change, even in the UK, is affecting different communities in different ways. So hopefully in the songwriting, then we can hear someone from South Wales. We can hear someone from the Highlands. We can hear someone from Blackburn or somewhere else telling their stories, which people in those similar communities will then resonate with. And then we can tap into these audiences rather than everybody come to London, get a record deal, and that's it. That's what we need. We need these fresh voices. We need, you know, So we need to hear how people, how it's affecting them, and hopefully what they can do and bring people together. So I think even from a cultural point of view, that's where we need a reset, where it's like, in terms of struggle, that's where some people find their voice.
Yeah, fascinating. Ssega, I'm going to put some links to your stuff below the podcast, but where should people, if they wanted to get a grip with your music and also what you're doing as as climate activism, where should they go? What should they do?
Yeah, so I guess you can follow me on the mainly Instagram and Twitter on socials. So LoveSsega, which is LOVE and then SSEGA, all one word, no space or anything. You can find me on the socials. You can see what I'm up to, and then Earth%. You can find out earth%.org, and then find on socials, and then through that, and hopefully through Earth%, because the whole point of Earth% is then to shine a light on all of the great organizations, whether it's Music Declares Emergency, whether it's Julie's Bicycle, whether it's Client Earth, whether it's a Greener Festival, all these other different things which are out there, people who are doing things and in different areas. So hopefully, whichever area of the music industry or the arts you're in, you can find something where you can find real experts or just other people like-minded. In that sense, but yeah, you can find me on LoveSsega.com nominally. Yeah. I think there's a website.
I'll put all these links below the podcast, so that if you're in doubt out there listening, just scroll down a bit and click. that should fix it. Okay, Ssega, thanks ever so much for joining us.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for having me.
And there we go. So if you found that useful, please share this podcast on with someone else who you think will also get something out of it. And if you'd like to email me and give me your thoughts, it's joe@musically.com. That's joe@musically.com. Don't forget, we have a free weekly email called The Knowledge, which rounds up a bit of this and a bit of that, of the best analysis, news, marketing, insight, and skills from Music Ally. There's a link below the podcast, so sign up and impress your boss. And don't forget as well, you can check out to see if you are eligible for a free Music Ally subscription. That link is also beneath the podcast. So that's it from me, Joe Sparrow. Until next time, farewell.